So my youngest was not born intentionally until my son went to kindergarten because I was like, I can't afford 4 kids in daycare. Like, that's just not a world in which I can't do that.
My guest today is Paige Connell, the creator behind She's a Page Turner, host of the Just Us Girls pod, and one of the loudest voices out there on what childcare actually costs. She and her husband became parents through foster care in 2019, 6 months before a global pandemic, and she has since gone from a corporate job to building a content business that replaced her salary and then doubled it. But this episode isn't just inspiration. As always, we're getting into the actual numbers. We start with the numbers she's become known for, how much her family pays for childcare for 4 kids outside Boston.
On average, my family pays anywhere between $60,000 to $70,000 a year in childcare costs.
We get into what her household was actually earning through all of it, the pay cut, the second job she worked at night just to cover daycare, and the layoff. And then the part I can't stop thinking about, the exercise she does with her husband that finally explains why she was so burnt out.
Despite the fact that I technically worked less hours and I had a more flexible job, he had exponentially more free time than I did.
Plus, one thing about her finances she said people would never guess, which coming from someone this transparent about money might genuinely surprise you. I'm Ashley, certified financial planner, founder of The Fiscal Femme, and I'm asking the question everyone is already wondering. How do people actually afford their lives? This is How Do You Afford This? Welcome to the show, Paige.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So happy to have you. I'm going to get right into it. You're raising 4 kids in Boston. You work full time. You run your own businesses. You're the host of the Just Us Girls pod. How do you afford this?
The answer to that question has changed over the years, for sure. And it's pretty nuanced, between what we earn and how we choose to spend our money. Yeah, it just varies.
Oh, I'm excited to get into all of that. You've been very open about the cost of your own childcare. Why is that important? Why do you think that's important?
Yeah, when I first started talking about it, there was no intention behind it. Like, I wasn't trying to raise awareness or anything. I think I was just trying to share the lived experience of being a parent. And at the time, it was probably 2023-ish, 2022. And I just shared it on a whim. I didn't know it was going to spark a large conversation. I just thought like, oh, everybody knows daycare is expensive. So like, yeah, when I say this number, it's not going to be shocking. But it was shocking to a lot of people, especially people who don't have kids or have never had to afford care because they had grandparents or they were a stay-at-home parent, whatever it might be. And yeah, so when I initially shared, I had no real intentions. Since then, obviously, I've become very involved and advocating for affordable childcare and care in general. The childcare industry in particular is pretty broken on both sides. Care workers are not paid fairly for their work. Families are really strapped. And so the reason I'm really transparent about it is because I think the more we talk about it, the harder it is to ignore. And I think politically, it is a nonpartisan issue. Like everyone across the board, constituents-wise, believe we need affordable childcare. Not just affordable childcare, also affordable care for those who are sick or aging, because it's just all so incredibly expensive. And every single person in some way or another pretty much has experienced having to provide or pay for care. And when you do, you realize just how unaffordable and inaccessible it all is.
Yes. Curious because you mentioned like you thought people knew how much this costs. Like, where do you think the gap was? Like, was it in that people don't realize how much care we need or someone would need, or they just didn't add it up per kid? Like, if you know how much daycare costs, why was this such a surprise?
Well, I think it varies greatly by where you live. So I'd say that first and foremost, right? Like I live in New England and Massachusetts, which is, I think it goes back and forth, but like is often the highest cost of childcare in the country. And it goes back to California, New York, like it's all expensive. But it's incredibly expensive. And it's very different than paying for childcare maybe in Delaware. It might be different than Kansas. And so if you live somewhere else and you see the price that I'm paying, you say, that's astronomical. That's insane. That's not what people pay for childcare. And I will get comments on my video like, ignore this video. She clearly sends her kids to a private school, like a luxury private school. My children actually go to a community-based nonprofit childcare center that is run by our town. So it's like the complete opposite of a luxury private education. It is like a town based. It's like the rec department, like for our town. And it's still incredibly expensive. And my family is actually paying below average for our state. So I think that that's one part of it. I think the other part is these numbers are not easily accessible, right? So when I first started touring daycares, you hear it's expensive. I used to work in daycares and I knew it was expensive, but I didn't know how much families were paying. It's not like you go on the website and the list of rates are right there. They're not readily available. So in order to get the rates, you go on a tour. Usually they hand you a piece of paper with the rates. They don't even email them to you. It's like a piece of paper that tells you how much it costs and all the varying levels. And so the average person doesn't have access to this information. And if you want to get it, typically you have to dig into like a state website that you have to like find the rabbit hole that takes you to the childcare page. And so I think people genuinely just don't know. And they don't know that childcare in particular is one of the fastest rising costs in our country. It has risen faster in a lot of places than housing prices and groceries. So everyone knows those things are expensive, right? Like everyone's like, groceries are expensive, housing is expensive. Well, so is childcare. And actually, it's risen at, I think, twice the rate of inflation over the last several years. So if you just take everything else you're paying for and then you add childcare on top, it's a very, very large expense for a lot of families. But I just think it's just not accessible information if you're not actually paying for it.
Right. Whereas like groceries, you're hit with it every time you buy anything. So it's
We're
right
all
in your
eating.
face. Right.
Right. We're all eating. And so unless you have a young child, and when I say young child, I mean a child under the age of like 10, because childcare costs don't go away when they go to kindergarten. But if you have a baby to a 10-year-old, then you know. But a huge swath of the population does not have a child in that bucket. And so they don't know how much it costs.
Right. And it's ever changing. I'm curious because, all of this to say, like, what does childcare for 4 kids cost you per year? And then, like, what does that look like as far as what you get from that cost?
So it totally depends on how old your kids are. So like when my kids were younger, I mean, when you ask how do I afford it, some of it was strategy, right? So my youngest was not born intentionally until my son went to kindergarten because I was like, I can't afford 4 kids in daycare. Like that's just not a world in which I can't do that. That's so expensive.
Right.
And so my son went to kindergarten. What I learned quickly when my son went to kindergarten was after school care was just as expensive as daycare. And then there was summer camp and no school days and half days. And it ended up kind of being a net loss. It was just all the same. So
Right.
on average, my family pays anywhere between $60,000 to $70,000 a year in childcare costs. This ranges from full-time daycare. So my 2 youngest were in full-time daycare up until last week. My 3rd child is going to kindergarten in a few weeks. Yes, so we're excited about that. But for the 2 of them in daycare, per month was like $3,200 a month, give or take. And that included a town discount because we go to a town daycare. So if you live in town, you get a slight discount and a sibling discount. So it's like $1,500, a little more than that per child. My rate is going up. It's close to like $1,800 a kid now for this coming school year because we lose the sibling discount plus there was a rate increase. So for my youngest, it's going to be about like $1,800 a month for daycare. That is Monday through Friday. She's usually there from like 8:30 to 5, give or take. Technically open 7 to 6. So you have that full-time care, only closed on national holidays, things like that. So like very steady childcare. Over the years, we had an au pair. We had part-time nannies. We tried everything because I had kids during COVID. So like daycares weren't open. We did everything. But daycare has been our primary form of childcare. And then as our kids have gotten older, we've also utilized after-school care. So typically that's care from 3:00-ish when the kids get out of school to 5:40. They don't go till 6. So like 5:40-ish, they'll start charging you after 5:45. So like 2.5 hours, give or take. That was $1,000 a month per child. And that was at the kids' school. So it's not like a special program. They didn't go anywhere. That was just like at their school that is, again, run by our recreational department in our town. So $1,000 a month per child. And then there's summer camp, which is really expensive as well. So that adds to the cost.
That was a surprise one for me. Like I was like, okay, we made it. This is like, we're making it work. And then it was like, wait, what do you do for these 3 months? Just to go back to one of the numbers you shared, because you shared $3,200 a month for daycare, but that was for 2 kids.
For 2 kids.
Okay. That was adding it up. Okay. Got
They're both in preschool, like preschool pre-K. So I think the most expensive childcare is typically infant care. And so where we are, I think it's like $570 a week, give or take, for infant care. So substantially more than paying for a preschooler. The rate goes down every single year, typically at a traditional childcare center based on their age, but then there's also annual increases. So it's not a massive discount year over year, but it's something like it definitely is less expensive to have a preschooler than it is to have an infant in childcare.
Yes. And curious, have you noticed, because you mentioned all the other things, have you noticed like the cost trajectory getting lower as a child gets older or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. I think it depends on the care that you need. So I'm really lucky that I have a flexible job. So I can do the no school days sometimes or the half days. I can get them on the bus in the morning so I don't do before school care. Right. So, like, I think a lot of families are bridging the childcare gaps to avoid the cost. So, this year in particular, I'm trying to do it without after school care to see how that goes because it felt crazy to have 3 kids in after school care for $3,000 a month for 2 hours a day. And so, the question is like, can I work from home with the 3 kids at home from 3 to 5? Right. Like, that's the question I'm answering. So, I think it can go down and it does go down depending on the care that you need. So, do you need before school care, after school, summer camp? Even with summer camp, is it before care, after care because camp ends at 3? So, I think it really depends. And when I say summer camp too, I typically mean like a day camp where they're going just from 9 to 3, not a sleepaway camp or anything like that. But it goes down. I think it went down maybe 40%. Which is not nothing. That's
No,
a
significant.
significant. Yeah, it's significant, but I think other things go up is what people will tell you, right? Their clothes get more expensive, their sports get more expensive, right? So like I think that side of things, it kind of just feels like it's all the same.
Right. Doesn't feel like you get a reprieve. You're just
No, yeah,
adding.
right, right.
And I loved the reel you shared asking people if their childcare costs more than their rent or mortgage. And I noticed in the comments, like so many people said yes. Is that the case for you? And like, do you have any statistics on that? Is that very common?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, the stats on that are that in all 50 states, basically, childcare for 2 kids is more expensive than mortgage and rent for a family. So like that's not a unique experience. I mean,
Right.
everybody who has more than 2 kids that utilizes childcare is probably spending more in childcare than they are for their mortgage or their rent. And that's saying something because mortgages and rates are very high. I think it was, yeah, almost all 50 states. It was maybe like 49 the last time I looked. So, anyways, it's basically a very universal experience. For me, yes, I am paying a lot more in childcare every single month than I'm paying for my mortgage. I am also one of the lucky few who has a 3% mortgage rate from 2020. So,
So
that's
jealous.
that's a part of it. But yeah, so, all in, my mortgage, my escrow, like all of that is significantly less than my childcare costs. I think it's like half, maybe even less. Yeah.
Amazing. And so to give context for the conversation, because I want to talk about more about the cost of kids, like in
Sure.
addition to childcare, the business, all of it. But what can you share about how you make it work financially, like your household
Mm,
income?
sure. Well, our household income has changed a lot over the last several years. So, when I first became a mom in 2019, my husband and I were both working full time. I was making probably just over 6 figures, maybe like $105,000 a year. We lived right outside of Boston, which is expensive, but I worked in the city. My husband was making closer probably to like 160, 170 at the time. He works a job with a lot of variable income, so like bonuses and overtime. He's a blue collar worker, so his income varies year to year and is heavily reliant on working more hours to make
Mm.
more money. We we were foster parents first, so our kids moved in with us in the summer of 2019, and then COVID hit, and, and I took a big pay cut to keep my job. So my company basically furloughed everybody. Was not furloughed, but I took a massive pay cut. I think I was down to like, I think I was cut by like 30,000, if not more. So took a hit financially there. My husband stayed the same. And so, but at the time, because our children were in foster care, we actually weren't paying for childcare. They were in foster care. They were going to daycare on a voucher. And so at the time, it was like, yes, we took a hit. Yes, our expenses went up because we have kids now, which we didn't have before. But there were some, that was how we were able to like still do it because when children are in foster care, the state provides a lot of things for them to make sure that they are well cared for. So that was an aspect there. But we did give birth to our first biological child that same year. So she was born that November. And by then, I think my salary maybe had gone back to normal. I don't think it had yet. But so over the next few years, my salary went up slightly year over year. I worked at the same company. But in 2020, 2020, I started freelancing for a company that I knew through work, doing like part-time sales for them. And I would do that at night and on weekends and on my lunch break. And that brought in probably like an extra $20,000 a year that I mostly used for childcare because at that point I was paying for childcare. So I worked that like part-time freelance sales job mostly to pay for childcare. Like I would take all of that income and just pay for daycare. Like that every month. It was like I got a commission check and I paid for daycare. That's like all I did. And I was a freelancer. So like it was all 1099. And I did that for like a year, give or take. So like I was working the two jobs and then I got a decent raise at my job. I was probably making like 150 at this point. So I stopped doing the sales job because I was like, this is like, it was a lot. I was exhausted and burnt out and I just had my fourth child. I was like, I cannot do all of these things at the same time, which is when I started posting on Instagram or TikTok. Actually, it was TikTok at the time and started creating content. And I did not make money on content for a really long time, probably for like a year and a half, but that became a new part-time job. So my income has changed a lot over the last few years. It is now my full-time job. So I had fully replaced my salary probably within 2 years doing content. So I was working full-time, doing content, making the same, doing both. And then I got let go from my job. Like the whole team got let go. So I felt very lucky that I had the content job, which was great. So my it's so funny because my income would always go up and then go down and go up and go down. My husband's always stayed the same. And throughout all of that, one of my biggest stressors was childcare. Like when I got let go, I would remember thinking like, well, should I take them out of daycare? But then if I take them out of daycare, I'll never get them back into daycare. And then like, I can't job search if they're home. Like how am I supposed to go to an interview? Like I don't know how to do any of that. So yeah, so our income has varied a lot. So like on average, we were making like probably 300,000 a year, give or take for like those first 5 years. My income is very variable still. That's just kind of the nature of content creation. I literally just got off a call with my team and I was like, guys, what's going on this month? But that's just kind of how things are. But it has gone up pretty significantly. I think last year I doubled my revenue at the company.
Congratulations. That's
Thank you.
incredible.
Thanks.
And well, I will get into this later, but curious, like when you first started posting, how has your content changed? Like, is the topic similar or is it evolved even in that way?
I mean, it's basically the same. I mean, my very, very first video was like a stitch where you like take somebody else's video and you respond to it. And I said, she was like, the best time of year to have a baby is December or something, November, because it's the holidays. And I said, no, the best time of year to have a baby is before the cutoff. So you don't end up spending another year of childcare costs on a baby. Which is so funny because my cutoff kid is going to school this month. And so I actually just made a video about her being a cutoff kid and the cost of childcare around that. And so my content, like I'm probably much more strategic about it. I've learned a lot. I know how to create content much differently than I did at the time, but the topics are very similar. Like if you go back and look 4 years ago, I'm talking about being a working mom, lack of paid parental leave, cost of childcare, the mental load. Like I'm talking about the same things. I just the way that I present them now is probably a little bit different.
Right. And now there's a team and there's revenue streams, but that's really cool that was what got you started posting is a lot of what you talk about today.
Yeah.
What about, so the cost of raising kids outside of childcare in Boston, like what does that entail? We mentioned sports getting more expensive and activities and after school.
Yeah, I think the big expense is food. I think when you think like people always ask me like, what do you spend on groceries? And I'm like, probably $450 a week minimum. Like 4 kids, 2 adults. Like, and my kids are growing. Like I have a 9-year-old now, so it's like he's getting bigger. He's eating more. Like you can't just buy a carton of berries. You need like 4 cartons of berries, right? So it's very expensive. So food is expensive. Costco, we spend a lot of money at Costco. But even I think it's all relative. Like, how many kids do you have? What do you choose to do? Like, we don't go on big family vacations. Almost all of our family vacations are local. So, like, we just got back from a family vacation. All in 7 nights was $3,000. Did we fly? No. Did we buy groceries? Yeah. Like, we that's not where we spend a lot of our money. Our cars are paid off, right? But like those are things that we invested in upfront as parents. Like my husband had to get a new car because he had a truck. Trucks don't fit 4 kids. I had to get a new car because I had a sedan. Sedans don't fit 4 kids. So your home in Massachusetts, housing is like a major, major cost. And so like if you need more space, like even in our house, two of our kids share a bedroom, but like, the housing prices are crazy. Adding onto your home is crazy. It's all very, very expensive. I'd say outside of that, big expenses are things like their clothing can be really expensive. I remember the jump from my daughter being like in a toddler shoe to a big kid shoe and being like, wow, sneakers are $75. Like, that's crazy
Yeah.
because they used to be $12. What happened? Clothes can be very expensive and then activities can be really expensive. So gymnastics for 1 month is $125. Tennis for 2 months was like three something. Swim lessons are crazy expensive. And obviously, not all of these things are a must to do, but I think a lot of families want to do activities for their kids. And so that is a cost to consider when you're thinking about it.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. And you mentioned like waiting until you hit a certain milestone before having another kid. Like, did you financially plan? Because you sound very financially savvy. And I'm thinking too, like the difference, just the big changes that happen with more kids. Like, there
Hmm.
is a point where you need a new car. And maybe if you had like a two-seater, right? Having one
Yeah.
kid brings you to that point. But a lot of times it's like, okay, you have a sedan and now you need to change the car, potentially change the layout of the home,
Yeah.
vacations change. Like, so I'm curious on that, just like the math of adding children. But then
Mm,
also, I think so many people ask me, or they do ask me, how do I know if I'm ready financially to have kids? And I'm curious if that's something you thought through
mhm.
because you do sound very strategic about it, or if it was something that you did and now you just figure it out.
I think it's a bit of both. I think it was a bit of both. And because financially ready is, again, subjective. It depends on the life you want to give your kid, right? So it's like, I have certain friends who are like, I put every extra dollar I have into a 529. I have friends who are like, screw 529s. They're not even going to be college in 6 years from now. So, like, we're not doing that, right? So it's like, I have friends who travel internationally and friends who do every sport imaginable. So, like, when you think about like cost of children, some of it's really relative to like what experience you want to provide your child, right? And so like the affordable question, like, is it affordable? Are you ready financially? That's a hard question to answer because it really depends on the life you want to give them. Now, if I'm thinking about childcare, car, home, food, all those things, I think it's really important to make sure you feel really confident and have some sort of safety net because, I got laid off, 2 years into
Right.
parenting. It happens and it happens to a lot of people. And unfortunately, a lot of women will tell me, I got laid off my mat leave or I got laid off while I was pregnant and it's really hard to get a job. And so I think you have to have those conversations about like the what ifs, like what if, like, we can do it with two jobs, but if I get laid off, what happens here? We definitely did some planning, but I think you can only plan so far. And you also don't know, like, we could not have foreseen a global pandemic. Like, we
Right.
didn't know that was coming, right? And like that changed the cost of so many things. And so we became parents 6 months before that and gave birth that first year of 2020. So it's like, we had no idea.
Yeah.
We had absolutely no idea. And so we felt ready, but at the same time, we weren't for other things. But like we definitely planned like how much is the car going to cost? I had so many spreadsheets about like how much we were paying for our budget, how much is childcare? I had every like childcare place in our area like in a list of how much they were and what their rates were and how they changed over the years and what if they go part-time here and part-time, like I had everything specifically for childcare because that was the biggest expense laid out. What if I don't have a job and I'm a stay-at-home mom? Like what does that look like? I think we did all of those calculations and sometimes like my sister, she chose to space her kids specifically based on when kids went to kindergarten. So like she didn't have her third child until her middle child was in kindergarten. And so her oldest daughter is significantly older than the baby and she loves her age gaps. My kids are much closer in age. But for her, she truly was like, I can't afford to have them much closer because I can't afford
Right.
all those costs at one time. And I think a lot of families are doing that math.
Yes. And it sounds like you were very prepared. You had written everything out and still hello pandemic kind of threw a wrench in
Mhm.
everything. And to your point on the life you want to give your kid, it's also we don't really know what we're going to be like until the kid comes or like what the kid's interested in or
Yeah.
I was talking to my sister and she was like the lowest key, I don't care about anything. And now she was laughing because she cares a lot about what the preschool is. And she's like, if you would have told
Mhm.
me before I had kids that I would care about this, like I would be shocked. So it's hard to know, I think, I love how you put it. You do the work, you see as much as you can, and then like have room for the
Yeah,
flexibility.
you have to. I mean, that's parenting though, is like you're constantly just adjusting all the time.
Yes. And to that point, I'm curious if there's anything that surprised you most about the cost of raising kids. I saw you shared about the cost of the public school bus recently, which was new to me. I didn't know that there was a cost of that. So curious, anything else surprising?
I think there's always something. It's so funny. Yeah, the public school bus, that when we first moved to our town, kindergarten was not free. Full day kindergarten, you had to pay for it.
Hmm.
And it was a lottery, which is still true for my neighboring town. Our town did change to free full day public kindergarten. But like there's a lot of things where people are like, what do you mean kindergarten's not free? I'm like, yeah. It's
Right.
not legal. They don't have to federally do it. So some places don't do it. Right. So there's a lot of surprising things for me in that sense. And just, I think how drastic, I mean, the surprising one for me was like how drastic costs went up year over year from summer camp to daycare. I think, historically you would see like a 3% increase sometimes because of COVID. Some places were doing 10 to 20% a year increases in childcare costs. I mean, that was shocking. I think, yeah, but the public school bus there's always like some secret thing where you're like, oh, who knew? Like, who knew? I literally just made a video this morning because I left the orthodontist for my daughter who needs a palate expander.
Mm,
And they were like, yeah, that's over $3,000. I'm like, that's crazy for like just the expander. I'm like, wow, that's a lot. And so, like, I would say every day there's something that is surprising to me and something that I think my daughter was sick and went to the doctors. And I think this is like a part of the systemic part of this conversation, like the lack of affordable childcare, the lack of affordable healthcare. Like our country really is so far behind our peer nations when it comes to how we support people in general and families and their health. But I went to the doctor and my daughter was sick and she had had strep earlier in the year and it was really bad. And so I was like, I want to test
mm.
her for strep. And they're like, well, while we're testing her for strep, we'll test her for flu. And I was like, yeah, I mean, like, whatever, like, test her for what you need to test her. I want to know what's wrong so I can help her. Turned out it was flu, which you can test for at home. Like, you don't need to test for the doctors, whatever. I ended up getting like a $400 bill for the test because I hadn't hit my deductible yet. And I'm like, I was like, I could have gotten that at
$25.
CVS. Yeah, I could have done that at CVS or just not tested her and just the treatment's the same. Like I had really gone in for strep because you can't test strep at home. So,
Right. And you
it's
don't want to leave that untreated.
and you don't want to, strep is so bad if it's untreated. And so it was one of those things where it felt like, of course, in the moment, I'm going to say, yes, do the flu test. Please. Like, yes, of
Right.
course, I want to make sure she's okay. And then you get the bill and you think, wow, like this is the stuff that really adds up for families. And it's something that is hidden. Again, like you don't know, you would have had to call your insurance and see where but like, are you going to do that when your baby's crying in the doctor's office? Like, you're not going to do that. So
Right.
it's those costs that are always so surprising.
Right. And the doctor can't just say what the cost is because it
They
depends on
don't
the
know.
insurance. Right.
Yeah, they don't know. Yeah.
You've also been very open about your relationship and how you've worked to split the mental load and the unpaid labor at home. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey?
Mm. Yeah. So it's been probably about 4 years since we started that journey, and 3 years since I shared about it online. And yeah, what happened was what happens to a lot of couples. I always say this. Typically, when one person is kind of drowning under the weight of the mental load of the unequal division of labor in their home, it's not as if their partner looked at them and said, like, this is all your responsibility. Best of luck. I'm out. Right? Like, that's
Right.
typically not what happens. What typically happens is I say it's kind of like a snowball. And especially when you go from having no kids to having kids, because the data actually shows that couples who are egalitarian before children tend to swing traditional after children. Like the roles become more traditional after kids. And I think that, again, that's lack of affordable childcare, lack of paid parental leave, like all of these things really push things onto mom's plate. And I always say it's kind of like a snowball where it's small at first, but it picks up snow and speed as it rolls down a hill and it gets bigger and bigger and faster and faster. And then one day you look at it and you're like, I can't stop this. Like, this is so heavy and so big and so fast. There's nothing I can do here. And I'm drowning, right? Like, I can't stop this
Right.
snowball. And that's really what it felt like for me, which is like, you have your first kid and it's like, oh, sure, I'll do all the forms for the doctor. And of course, I'll take them to that appointment. And of course, I'll do this thing. And then yeah, I don't mind making their lunches. And then you have the next kid and it's like more and more and more. And then as they get older, I think people often assume that this is an issue for young babies. I found the mental load and the like logistics way harder with older kids than younger kids. And so as you add children and your older children get older, it's like, it's just this mountain of work. And I, like many other women, have a partner who is incredibly engaged and involved. And like, if you looked at us from the outside window and you looked in, you'd be like, oh, equal parents, like doing the same things. But I was doing most of the behind the scenes, like invisible work, the mental load, the knowing of the doctor's appointments, answering the teacher's email, asking my husband to make a lunch and telling him what to make, right? All of those things. And so for us, a big part of the change came from me recognizing what was happening. Like, I couldn't recognize it. And I think a lot of women are in that position where it's like, if you had been like, why are you burnt out and exhausted? I'd be like, I don't know. It's too much to do. But I wouldn't have been able to say, like, my list is too long. There's too many things I'm doing by myself. My brain is constantly going. It never, like, I couldn't have said anything. So part of it comes from being able to acknowledge what's happening and actually articulate it, which took me a really long time. And then it comes from making a lot of that invisible labor really, really visible. And the unsexy work is like kind of running your home like a business. I used to be an operations manager, and we had such clear accountabilities on our team. It was like, if somebody dropped the ball, everyone knew who dropped it, because it was just so cut and dry whose job was what and who was meeting which deliverable and like why. And we don't do that in a home typically, right? And
Right.
so there's a lot of defaulting. And the default tends to fall to women because we think of them as better at things. They're better at planning birthday parties. They're better at cooking. They're better at soothing a crying baby. When in reality, none of that's true. And so it really, for us, we used a spreadsheet because I love spreadsheets, and we listed everything that had to happen in our homes, and then we assigned it out to each other. And it was a slow, long process. But like, once we got our groove, like, it really kind of becomes just like second nature. And so now we really operate in a pretty equitable way as much as we can. And I say that because there's so much nuance. Like, his job is way different than my job. And so, like, I technically do more parenting than he does. But at the end of the day, there's limitations for all of us of like what we can do with our time.
Right. And curious, like, how often you revisit the spreadsheet, because like you mentioned, things are changing. And I think that's
Mhm.
something that happened for us is we did the spreadsheet, but then a job changes, or now it's like the
Yeah.
new school year and there's 80 different activities. Like, what is your cadence with keeping up for that? Or is it like a lot of communication, or what do you
Yeah.
recommend?
We haven't looked at the spreadsheet in years, transparently. I think we got to a point where we knew what was going on. And now we don't really have clearly defined roles. Now we are just so deeply ingrained in like knowing what has to get done and communicating with each other. So I think like the spreadsheet is something that is really helpful at the beginning to build accountability and to like flex the muscle, especially if your partner's taking over things they've never done before. There's a lot of stuff you have to hand over, a lot of knowledge, a lot of information, and it's exhausting and annoying to teach somebody how to make lunches. But like, that is just how it is. Once you get into a good groove, it becomes much more of talking about the logistics, saying like, hey, our daughter's joining the dance team. That means she's going to be at dance 4 nights a week from this time to this time. I'm driving her on Monday. You're driving her Tuesday. If you can't drive her Tuesday, we're going to do a pickup or like a carpool, right? Like, it now our life is less about like, is it a 50-50 split? This is the list. It's more just constantly talking about it. And I think the best way to do it is like, you can have a weekly meeting if that works for your family. But if you don't feel like you need a weekly meeting, I think anytime there's a change, kid signs up for a new sport, new school, new job, travel, anything like that, it's reason to have a conversation always, because it shifts what's happening. And almost always we fall back into those patterns of default assuming who's going to take on what. And it is so much better to actually have a conversation about it to avoid resentment and frustration and a disagreement later on. So saying, hey, our daughter signed up for this dance team. It's going to be a lot of work, not just for her, but for all of us. How are we going to do this? Who's
Right.
packing her bag? Who's making her snacks? Who's coordinating carpool? And what is that going to look like? And what's the other person doing while, I'm doing XYZ?
So it's like the new thing is the trigger. That's
Mm-hmm.
like, we should have a conversation. And then also too, like to your point on the snowball, to be able to name it all, like from the packing the bag, like those
Yeah.
little things that take time, take thought, take brain space that we might just write off as like, oh, that's super quick, no big deal. But to be able to just quantify all of it and have it out there to dole it out.
Yeah. Cause it's like, usually it's made up of like 105-second tasks, right? But like,
Yes.
that's still 100 things you had to do and keep track of. And that's a lot.
Right. And they just sit in your brain. Yes.
Yep.
So, like, almost like a rapid round of advice for people.
Sure.
Curious what you would tell a newlywed. Like, how
Mm.
do they get ahead of this?
Talk to each other. and don't assume things. So when you're traveling for work, have a conversation about how that impacts your partner. When you choose to have a children, have a conversation about who's going to take sick days and why and how. And will you work from home and who's taking kids to the doctors? When you fill out forms for school, whose email is going first? Who's the primary pickup person, right? I think when you sign your kid up for soccer, yeah, who is filling out the forms? I learned this one, like you have to mail a birth certificate basically every time you sign up for a new sport. And so it's like, who's getting the birth certificate and who's mailing it and who's doing all that, right? Like, I think the thing that we often do, especially when it's just two of you, is we just like fall into like, you're good at that. I'm good at this. Let's do it. But oftentimes what that does is it kind of overburdens one person who's like quote unquote good at a lot of things. And typically women have been conditioned to do domestic labor, the cooking, cleaning, party planning, all of those things. And men are not quote unquote as good at it or haven't been conditioned to do it. And so I think it's actually super important just to have conversations. Like when you move in with someone, like what are the expectations for how we clean the kitchen? Or what are the expectations for laundry? What are the expectations? How often are we changing the sheets? And are you ever going to do it? Right? Because I think what often happens is like a woman will start to change the sheets and she'll wash them once a week and the husband doesn't even know what happened. He doesn't even know. He like has no idea. Like if you ask him, he'd be like, I've never washed these sheets. Like they've never been washed. And it's like, no, they have every single week. You just didn't see it happen. And so I think having these conversations out loud, making that invisible work very, very visible and talking about it is really, really important because it's easy to get frustrated that your partner has never washed the sheets, but that person doesn't even know that's ever happened to begin with, which is gross. But like, but like you'll ask a lot of men, like, have you ever washed the towels? And they're like, no. And it's like, well, who's washing them then? Right. So like, I think having those little conversations before kids especially is so incredibly important because you start to flex the muscle of deciding together how you're going to do something and not assuming or defaulting to one person.
So you get in that system like early.
Yeah.
And maybe they think, I'm clean when I dry myself off. So like, they don't need.
It's gross.
So.
Yeah. Have you ever watched New Girl?
Yes.
The towel cleans me. I don't clean the towel. Yes. But I think a lot of stuff like that comes up where even I didn't know, like a lot of us don't know where it's like my husband might say like, yeah, I clean the dryer vent out on the back like every 6 months. And I'd be like, oh, I had no idea I never saw you do it. And I didn't know. Right. So like, it's not just, I always tell people the mental load issue that often happens in parenting exists with siblings. It exists with your parents. I mean, it exists in so many dynamics, but so much of it is because there's this invisible work happening that if you don't see it and don't know about it, you actually can't reconcile it because you don't even know it exists.
Right. And sometimes it is like for me was learning what they actually are doing.
Yeah.
And just realizing it is a lot of work. It's like just a lot of load. Yes.
Objectively, I think what families do these days is more than any family can really handle. Like having most homes are dual income. You've got children involved. The demands on parents are much higher. If you actually look at the graphs, parents do more hands-on parenting these days than our parents did. So we're spending way more time with our kids, but we're also working more paid hours. And so it's like the math doesn't make sense. And so of course everybody's burnt out, including the men, because there is objectively too much to do.
Yes. All right. So then a couple who's about to have a baby, they're listening to this. Like, what do they do to prep?
Definitely talk about finances and like run all the scenarios. I think it's really important and talk about what you want. Like, what are your goals for your family? What do you want to be able to do for them financially? Get on the same page about how you want to parent. That's really important. I think people don't talk about that a lot. And so like it goes in gentle parenting and a dad's not on board, right? Like that, like you've got to talk about that and like agree on it. I definitely encourage people to talk about the division of labor and I encourage men to be equal partners from the very, very beginning. I don't care that your partner's breastfeeding. I don't care that your partner is maybe the one physically having the baby. In the hospital, you're changing diapers. You are waking up overnight. You are feeding that baby. And even if she's breastfeeding that baby, you're changing that baby's diaper. You're reswaddling. You're helping them go back to bed. Like men being involved with their children from the very, very beginning makes a world of a difference in the outcomes because, and I know a lot of men don't have paid parental leave. And what often happens is that parental leave period is when women take on so much work, so much of the parenting work. And then she goes back to work and never hands any of it back to her partner. And it becomes this idea of like, well, you've just been doing overnights. You're just better at it. So she continues to not sleep, right? While he's going to work well slept. So I think having these conversations and having as close to an equitable division of labor from the very, very beginning is so incredibly important. And like not allowing it to default to one person, because it's very easy to do that when systemically we kind of set it up that way.
Right. And if that person has, let's say, weeks and months of getting the reps in, they're going to be better.
They're going to be good.
Yeah.
You're going to be good at it. Yeah, exactly. And so like if a lot of men don't take their paid parental leave even when it's available to them, because they're fearful of what that will mean for them at work. And I always hate to break it to the men, but the women are also fearful of what that will mean for them at work, which is why the motherhood penalty exists. But the more men who take it, the more normalized it becomes, the harder it is for them to punish anyone for taking paid parental leave. And like in other countries, this is just not a thing, right? Like parental leave is just an assumed thing. And in some countries, it's mandated, like where both parents have to take it. And so I think it's incredibly important to put those reps in so that you are just as well versed in your child and their life as your partner is. And so if your partner has to step out, you can easily step in.
Yes. Curious, like you mentioned, someone going to work rested and someone going to work exhausted. Like, what are the repercussions on careers and money, resulting money, when it's so unequal?
Well, so it's so unequal. So there's a couple things that happen. I just alluded to the motherhood penalty and the wage gap. And some people will tell you the wage gap doesn't exist. The wage gap does exist. It just starts when you become a mom. You know, historically, there was a wage gap between men and women, and there still is a wage gap between men and women. But the largest gap happens at parenthood. And it's not just between moms and dads, which is the most interesting thing. So when a man becomes a dad, he is seen as more dedicated and hardworking at work, and he is promoted more and given more salary increases. And so more so than single men or men with no children. So married men with children make more than married men without children.
The fatherhood bonus.
It's the fatherhood bonus, exactly. And then the mothers make significantly less. They're passed over for promotions and salary increases because they're seen as less dedicated, less loyal, less hardworking, more of a flight risk. Like, oh, she had one baby when she had the second baby, right? So it's this whole idea. Even the idea that women can't say that they're pregnant in a job interview or that they have children in a job interview because it will reflect poorly on them, but a man would because it reflects well on him, right? So there's that. But then systemically, you know, the lack of paid leave means a lot of women take unpaid leave, which means they have less money in their retirement, which means they excel less quickly in their careers, which means they're more likely to leave their careers. So women are more likely, I think it's 2 times more likely to adjust their careers. So leave their career, go part-time, become a consultant than men are because of the lack of childcare, because of childcare gaps. So just childcare alone impacts how much women participate in the workforce. And so there's so many layers to that conversation, but the exhaustion, right? It's like you'll meet a lot of women who will be like, I was so passionate about my job and then I had kids and I'm just so exhausted. I have no capacity. You know, like I don't have it, and they don't have time. So men tend to spend an hour more a week on paid work, or maybe it's a day, but they spend more time on paid work per week, whereas women spend exponentially more time on domestic labor, unpaid work, and childcare. And so men are able to take that time that women are doing, caring for the family, cooking, cleaning, laundry, and they put that into their work. And so, you know, I remember getting the advice, like, you need to network more. You need to go to more events. You need to do this. You need to read more books at home about business. I'm like, with what? With what time? With what time? Like, how am I supposed to do that? But a lot of men will do that because they do actually have that time. And so I think there's a lot of reasons gaps exist here.
Right. And the advice that you could have used, so thinking about you when you mentioned the snowball, like when you're in it, it's so hard to find the time to be the one to proactively do the project of getting the things off your plate. Like, what advice would you give to someone who's like just overwhelmed, they have kids?
Yeah, because my advice to somebody who doesn't yet is so different than somebody who's in it, because it's way harder to dig out of it than it is to start off strong, right? Like, I think we all wish we had done that. I think there's 2 phases. I always say, like, first and foremost, make the invisible labor visible. Second, you come up with what the division of labor will be in your home, and you start to slowly kind of transition to that, which takes some time. The third part is kind of that mental load portion. It's really easy for a partner to take over a physical task like grocery shopping. It's a lot harder to get them to do meal prep and to think about the meals we're having and then to grocery shop based on those meals, right? Like, You can hand them a list and they'll go grocery shopping, but that's not the full task. So it's
Right.
kind of like I think of it in like kind of like 4 stages. And then the final stage, the thing that I think about and I tell people to do is to, again, unsexy. I have a spreadsheet for it, but it's this, I do this like time equity assessment sometimes with my husband where we look at our time. How much time does Paige spend solo parenting? How much time does he spend solo parenting? How much time do we spend on paid work? How much time do we spend on unpaid work? How much time do we parent together? And how much free time do we have? And the first time we did that, despite the fact that I technically worked less hours and I had a more flexible job, he had exponentially more free time than I did. And so doing an exercise of looking at that and saying like, no wonder I'm burnt out. Like I haven't had an hour to myself at all, right? So we evened that out by protecting time on the calendar where I would block 2 hours on Tuesdays and Thursdays from dinner and on. I'd go to yoga. I'd go to dinner with a friend. I'd go walk somewhere. I would do whatever. Like I would just leave for 2 protected hours, so 4 hours a week that were just my time.
Mm.
And this is a really important part because I think a lot of the women that we're probably talking to or about have young children and are working and taking care of children and they're exhausted and they're burnt out and they think, I don't even have the capacity to give this to my partner. Like this, it's so much work. And part of that is because that gap in leisure time, the data shows that parents of young children, like 5 and under, men tend to have 4.5 hours more leisure time per week than their wives do. And so that's hobbies, TV, fitness. It's just time for themselves. And women don't have that time. And so there's a gap in all of those things. And so, of course, it's hard to think about handing this over to your partner when you don't even have time to like read a book, right? Like that shouldn't
Right.
be a luxury is reading a book. But a lot of women will be like, I would just love to read a book sometime. And I'm like, that's really sad that that's how hard it is to read a book. And so, but I tell people it's a process and it's worth the hard work because I always say it was probably like a year-long process for us. But once you do that, it's like it opens up so much for you, for your family, for your partner. Like the hard work pays off. And so if it's 1 year of hard work for hopefully a lifetime, like a better, well-functioning home and a partnership that feels healthy and sustainable and happy, I think the work is worth it.
Yes. I'm like, can you make that into a downloadable guide? The
I
spreadsheet.
do have one.
Oh, you do? Okay, good.
I do,
I'm
yeah.
like, good, because I also want to do that with my team, like for work. I think that assessment, like quantifying what you're doing, what you're thinking, and
Mhm.
offloading it like in business and personal. I
Well,
want to
yeah,
talk about your business. What
sure.
are the different ways that you earn money now? Because you mentioned it was so inspiring. You mentioned that you've doubled your revenue from when you were full time. Like how, yeah, tell us how the business works.
Yeah. So it's every content creator does it differently. And that's why there's like no one path to success here. Like you'll know content creators who do like straight up affiliate marketing, right? And it's like links and selling and courses and, all that. I do affiliate, but not like that. So the bulk of my revenue is from brand deals. So I work with partners like Skylight Calendar, which is a no brainer, right? Because I use it, we love it and it's a great tool. I'm a big believer in tools to help manage the mental load and the logistics of family life. I don't think
Yeah.
they're a solution, but I think tools are really helpful. So I do a lot of brand partnerships, and that is the bulk of my revenue. Then is affiliate marketing. So linking to something like a Skylight Calendar, and you get commission basically on what you sell. And so when people say, oh, what is that thing you're holding? I'm like, okay, here's the link and people can earn money. I earn money on that and people can shop it if they want to. People do that across Amazon, Shop My, LTK. I think we've all seen them like when we click on a link. But so
Yeah.
affiliate revenue, and then you get paid by the apps depending. So some apps pay more than others. So I don't get paid basically by YouTube at all. A lot of people do get paid from YouTube. I get paid a little bit from Facebook, a little bit from TikTok. It's not a huge portion of my revenue. It used to be. It used to be the bulk of my revenue, but they always are changing how they pay creators. And so it's not a sustainable, repeatable thing. You essentially have to go viral to get paid. It's like you get paid per view and per 1,000 views, but they decide the RPM based on like how long somebody watches, what country are they in. Like you just can't control any of that. So
Right.
that's like a tiny, tiny portion of my income. And then I do speaking engagements. I'll do some consulting here and there. And so, yeah, it's like 5-ish revenue streams.
Amazing. And you mentioned your team earlier. Like, what does the team look like behind you?
Okay, so team, when I say team, I mean my manager and my agent. And so they actually don't manage any of my day-to-day business. Their job is to pitch me and get me brand deals, and then to help manage those brand deals. So they'll do, which is great because they'll do the contracts and the negotiations and invoicing, like all the things that I don't want to be doing because it's a nightmare. Invoicing is the worst, and like legal contracts are the worst. And so that is their job. They do take a commission for doing that. So traditional like management, like even a sports manager, right? They take a commission of the deals that they bring in. And so I have an agent and a manager that do that. And then my actual like quote unquote team, the people who help me day to day, I have a virtual assistant. She works 15 hours a month, not very much, just to help me with back end things. Like when I'm like, I need to pull all this data for all of these things. Can you help me do that? She'll help me with that. But day to day, otherwise, like all content creation is me. Every carousel, every post, every caption, every Instagram story, everything you see, I did myself that day, probably.
Love it. And what's the difference between the manager and the agent? Are they together or like the same
This is a
company
great
or separate?
question. Mine are separate. Most content creators who are like traditional content creators only have a manager. They don't have both. My manager is more of like a full service talent manager. So she could rep me across a book deal, speaking engagements, brand deals, TV if I wanted to do TV, right? So she also works with like Olympians and actors. And so like she's not just digital. And because of that, I also have an agent who's similar, who can pitch me for speaking gigs, who can do all those things. So typically an agent is like pitching, a manager is managing. So once the deal is closed, they manage the logistics. So if a brand, I've had this before where a brand was like, we want these edits. And I'm like, that's so funny because like the script was agreed upon and this was agreed upon. And like, I already did that edit. I don't have to say that to the brand. I can tell my manager, hey, they're asking for an edit that's outside of our agreed upon contract. Can you talk to them about that? And so they handle all of that on my behalf. So I can kind of stay out of the weeds on all of those things. And so it's their job to communicate with the brand on my behalf. I typically don't even talk to the brand. And then my manager and my agent work together, but they're separate companies, separate entities, do separate things, but we all kind of work collaboratively.
Got it. So agent's more the pitcher, manager, as the
Yeah.
name suggests, is managing
Yeah,
once that deal is happening.
exactly.
All right, I could talk to you all day, but just a few more questions.
Sure.
What's something about your finances people would never guess?
I think that until a few years ago, I didn't really have much of a savings. I think this is not unique. We were high earners, but I was paying off student loans. We had car payments. We had 4 kids in daycare. We just didn't have a deep savings. We didn't have a deep savings for college. We didn't have a deep savings in general. Like that just was not something we had. And I think that's true actually of more of the population than people realize. I think people assume like you make a good income, you obviously have a good savings. We just didn't. It was just tapped out. And so we do now. That was like one of our first things. When I first started making content money, my number one priority was pay off all debt. So like all cars, all loans, all everything, pay off all debt with that extra money and then save it. Like save as much as I could. So before I got laid off, the one good thing was before I got laid off, I was debt free and had paid, like I had saved a significant amount of money.
Because you're earning double.
Because I was earning double. And I thought, yeah. And to me, that money felt fleeting. So I was like, what can I do with it that makes the most sense for my family? So that was, and I took the kids to Disney, which, when you take your kids to Disney.
Yeah.
So I did that. But I think that's the thing, right? Like until 2 years ago, I really didn't have a savings account.
Yeah. I think you're 100% right. That is a lot more common. And like to the question earlier where I said, do people financially prepare for kids? Like I talked to so many people, they're like, we're just figuring it out. Like I didn't really think I could. And now I'm doing it and at the cost of my goals in a lot of cases, like saving, investing.
Retirement, a big one, I think. Yeah. Yeah. I hear a lot of people say like, yeah, we stopped putting into our 401k right now, or we stopped saving for college because the cost of childcare is college. It's like you can't do both at the same time. And so I think a lot of families are just saying like, okay, for right now, we're paying childcare. And maybe in 5 years, we'll have a savings or we'll save for college. And yeah, everybody's just doing their own math.
Their own seasons. What are you working towards affording next?
Our cars are paid off and they're used. I'm always tempted to be like, I should get a new car. And then I'm like, no, you have a paid off vehicle. You will keep that car until it dies. Right. But like our cars are breaking sometimes. So like I'm thinking about it, new cars. College or whatever my kids want. One of the beauties of my business is that sometimes I can pay my kids because they do work on behalf of my business. Like if they show up in my content, I don't show their faces ever, but like if I do cooking content and they help me with it and their hands in it or whatever, I can pay them. And so one of the beauties of that is I can pay them and then invest that in a Roth. So I am doing that for my kids right now. So I
Amazing.
pay them a salary. We invest that salary on their behalf. So hopefully they have both, well, we're investing it in multiple ways, but a Roth plus college or whatever they want to spend that money on when they're older. And so right now, a lot of my money is going into things like estate planning and just long-term financial planning for the kids.
It's amazing. Yeah, this week my son's home from camp and he took a lot of photos of me. So I'm like,
Cute.
we're going to pay you for this.
Yeah, that's cute.
You talked about childcare
Mm.
as something the system should support, not just individual families. What could there be in place, like in a dream scenario, that would just change the math for parents?
Yeah, I mean, I think affordable childcare for every family would be a game changer, and not just for families, but economically. I mean, it would be a massive win for our country if we had affordable childcare across the board. I think on top of that, paid parental leave for everyone would be massive. And it's not as if it hasn't been done before. Like it can be done. We just in our country have not prioritized social safety nets for families. I think another thing too is I think about public education a lot and the way that we do and do not invest in kids and their education and how that puts kind of undue burdens on families and continues to create like big socioeconomic divides educationally. Like I think there's so many things systemically that we're not doing that could just change the experience of parenthood. Even the idea of like compensating stay-at-home parents, compensating caregivers, not just parents, caregivers, people who leave the workforce to care for an aging parent, right? Like caregivers deserve to be compensated and yet they're not. And they're not compensated and the care that they need is so expensive. So it's like
Right.
overall, I just think we need affordable care in our country and affordable health care. And that would go, I mean, you wouldn't start off in debt as a parent getting your $10,000 bill for your C-section, right? You would start off knowing that you had what you needed and you wouldn't have to stress about money, at least for that part of your life.
Right. Thank you so much, Paige, for sharing about all the incredible work you're doing, making the cost of childcare and the mental load more transparent for us all. Where can everyone find you and support your work?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. You can find me pretty much everywhere: Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, at She is Paige Turner. I also have a Substack where I break down more of my like parenting hacks. So like what apps I'm using, my spreadsheet for how we decide on our time.
I'm
My
getting that
Substack
right
is-
after this.
Yeah. My Substack has a bunch of stuff like that, just like working mom logistics and how we manage it. And that's at She's a Paige Turner as well. I'm also on LinkedIn at Paige Connell. Yeah, anywhere you find She's a Paige Turner, I will be there.
Amazing. Yes. Go follow Paige. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to How Do You Afford This? If you loved this inside look into how people are actually affording their lives, follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We have new episodes dropping every week, and trust me, you do not want to miss them. And if you're enjoying the show, please share this with a friend. You'll get credit for introducing them to their favorite new podcast, and you'll be helping me on my mission to make crafting a wealthy life more accessible, more transparent, and a whole lot more fun. One more thing before you go: if this got you fired up to chase your own money goals, come hang out with us in the Money Club. It's a community of ambitious women building wealth together, and on average, members put an extra $10,000 toward their money goals in the first year. Come see what it's all about at thefiscalfemme.com/money-club. See you next week.